A millionaire CEO is accidentally kissed by a single mother. The single mother struggled to keep her family restaurant running and raise her son. From an accidental kiss, an unexpected bond is formed. What he did after returning to the restaurant will shock you. Follow this and more heartfelt stories. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Olivia Bennett's modest apartment in downtown Seattle as she raced against time. A single mother with a 6-year-old son, she had mastered the art of multitasking, preparing breakfast, ironing her work uniform, and helping Ethan pack his backpack for school. Her life was a constant balancing act between her responsibilities as a mother and her job as a waitress at a popular cafe in Pike Place Market. "Ethan, honey, have you seen my keys?" she called out, brushing her chestnut hair into a quick ponytail. "They're on the fridge, Mom," the boy replied, his mouth full of cereal. Olivia grabbed the keys and looked at her watch. They were already late. Again. After dropping Ethan at school, she would have exactly 12 minutes to reach the cafe before her shift started. The constant pressure of living paycheck to paycheck while raising a child alone was overwhelming, but Olivia had grown accustomed to the struggle. "Let's go, buddy. Ms. Peterson won't be happy if you're late again." The morning commute was its usual chaotic symphony of honking horns and crowded sidewalks. Seattle's business district buzzed with activity as streams of professionals made their way to towering office buildings that dominated the skyline. After leaving Ethan at school with a quick kiss on the forehead and a promise to pick him up on time, Olivia rushed toward Pike Place Market. She took her usual shortcut through the lobby of the Emerald Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that housed several tech companies and financial firms. The security guards knew her by now and allowed her to pass through the fancy marble lobby to save precious minutes on her commute. As she hurried across the polished floor, her mind was already at work, mentally preparing the day's specials, calculating her tips from yesterday, and wondering if she could afford Ethan's upcoming school field trip. Lost in thought, she spotted a tall figure in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit waiting by the elevator. The broad shoulders, the confident stance, the way he checked his watch. It had to be Ryan, her best friend Megan's fiancé. Without hesitation, Olivia approached him from behind, her lips curving into a mischievous smile. It had been weeks since she'd seen Ryan, and surprising him with their usual greeting seemed like a welcome moment of levity in her hectic morning. "Guess who?" she whispered, standing on her tiptoes to place a quick, friendly peck on his cheek, a habit they'd developed over years of friendship. But as the man turned, Olivia's heart plummeted. This wasn't Ryan, not even close. Instead, she found herself staring into the steely blue eyes of Jackson Reed, the notoriously ruthless CEO of Reed Enterprises, one of Seattle's most powerful tech conglomerates. His face, which frequently appeared in business magazines and local news, was unmistakable. Strong jawline, piercing gaze, and an expression that could intimidate the most seasoned executives. I'm so sorry," Olivia stammered, her face burning with embarrassment. "I thought you were someone else." Jackson Reed stared at her with an unreadable expression. Instead of the anger she expected, there was something else in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or amusement. For a man known for his cold demeanor and calculated business tactics, his reaction was surprisingly measured. "That's quite an unusual way to introduce yourself, miss." His voice was deep, controlled, with an underlying tone that Olivia couldn't quite decipher. "Bennett. Olivia Bennett. And I'm truly sorry, Mr. Reed. I mistook you for a friend." A slight smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Your friend must be a fortunate man." Before Olivia could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from her manager. "Where are you? We're packed this morning." "I have to go," she said, already backing away. "Again, I'm really sorry about the misunderstanding." As she hurried toward the exit, she could feel his gaze following her, but she didn't look back. The embarrassment was too fresh, too raw. All she wanted was to disappear into the morning crowd and forget the entire incident. The rest of her morning passed in a blur of coffee orders, breakfast platters, and customer interactions, but Olivia couldn't shake the memory of those piercing blue eyes. At 32, she had built walls around herself, protective barriers, that kept her focused on what mattered most: providing for Ethan and rebuilding the life that had crumbled when her family's restaurant failed 3 years ago. There was no room for distractions, especially not in the form of a billionaire CEO whose world was completely separate from hers. "Earth to Olivia," said Megan, snapping her fingers in front of Olivia's face. "You've been pouring cream into that coffee for like a full minute. What's going on with you today?" Olivia blinked, quickly setting down the cream pitcher. "Sorry, just tired. Ethan had nightmares again last night." It was easier than explaining what had actually happened. How could she tell anyone that she had accidentally kissed Jackson Reed, the man whose reputation for cold efficiency and ruthless business tactics had earned him the nickname the architect of downfall among Seattle's business circles? The cafe door chimed, and Olivia's gaze automatically shifted toward the entrance. Her heart stuttered. Standing at the doorway, scanning the crowded space with calculated precision, was Jackson Reed himself. His tailored suit and commanding presence drew the attention of everyone in the room. Without acknowledging the hostess who approached him, he walked directly to a prominently placed table by the window and sat down. Megan whistled low. "Well, would you look at that? Jackson Reed in our humble establishment. I thought executives like him only ate at places with Michelin stars." Olivia froze. "I'll take the back tables. Can you handle his?" Megan raised an eyebrow. "Are you kidding? The man tips more for coffee than we make in a day. He's all yours." "Megan, please. Too late. He's in your section. Besides, manager's looking. Just be your charming self." Taking a deep breath, Olivia smoothed her apron and approached his table. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she maintained her professional composure. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. Welcome to Pike Place Cafe. What can I get for you today?" She was proud of how steady her voice sounded. His eyes met hers with quiet intensity. "Ms. Bennett, what a pleasant coincidence." It wasn't a coincidence. They both knew it. "Our special today is the Northwest. Breakfast, locally sourced eggs, smoked salmon, and sourdough toast," she continued, ignoring the implication in his words. "Coffee, black." He closed the menu without looking at it. "And perhaps an explanation for this morning's greeting." Olivia's professional smile faltered slightly. "As I said, it was a case of mistaken identity. Nothing more." "You seem uncomfortable," he observed. "Does my presence disturb you?" "Not at all," she lied. "I'll get your coffee." As she walked away, she could feel the weight of his gaze. Why was he here? Was this some kind of power play? A way to make her squirm after the morning's embarrassment? Men like Jackson Reed didn't just wander into places like Pike Place Cafe without a reason. When she returned with his coffee, he was on his phone speaking in clipped authoritative tones about market projections and quarterly reports. He paused his conversation when she set down his cup. "Will there be anything else?" she asked. "Not today, Ms. Bennett." Then, lowering his voice, he added, "But I have a feeling our paths will cross again soon." Olivia spent the remainder of her shift stealing glances at his table, watching as he worked on his laptop while barely touching his coffee. When he finally left, he placed a $100 bill under his cup. She stared at it, unsure whether to feel insulted or grateful. What? She didn't know what she couldn't possibly know, was that Jackson Reed never did anything without purpose, and his appearance at the cafe was only the beginning of a story that would challenge everything she believed about life, love, and second chances. 2 days later, he returned, and the day after that, each time sitting at the same table, ordering the same black coffee, leaving the same excessive tip, each time watching her with that same unreadable expression that made her heart race despite her best efforts to remain indifferent. By the end of the week, everyone at the cafe had noticed the pattern. The whispers started, questions about why Seattle's most eligible bachelor, a man worth billions, kept returning to their modest cafe. Theories ranged from the cafe's supposedly exceptional coffee to a secret business deal in the works. Only Olivia knew the truth. This wasn't about coffee or business. This was about the kiss that was never meant to happen. 3 weeks had passed since the mistaken kiss, and Jackson Reed's presence at Pike Place Cafe had become as reliable as the morning rush. Every day, At precisely 9:30 a.m. he would arrive, take his seat by the window, and work for exactly 1 hour. He rarely spoke beyond placing his order, but his eyes followed Olivia's movements with undisguised interest. "He's definitely into you," Megan whispered, as they refilled salt shakers after the morning shift. "The man owns half of Seattle's tech district. He could get coffee anywhere, but he chooses to come here every day." "It's not like that," Olivia insisted, though she couldn't offer a better explanation. "Maybe he just likes the atmosphere." Megan rolled her eyes. "Right, because billionaires are known for preferring cramped cafes over their luxury penthouse offices." Despite her protests, Olivia had begun looking forward to these daily encounters. There was something enigmatic about Jackson Reed that intrigued her. Beneath his intimidating exterior, she occasionally glimpsed something else, a fleeting vulnerability in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. One rainy Tuesday morning, their routine changed. Instead of working on his laptop, Jackson closed it as soon as Olivia approached his table. "Miss Bennett," he began, his voice lower than usual. "Would you join me for a moment, if you're not too busy?" Olivia glanced around. The morning rush had subsided, and her manager was occupied with a delivery in the back. "Just for a minute," she conceded, sliding into the chair across from him. "I've been coming here every day for 3 weeks," he said without preamble. "And while the coffee is adequate, that's not why I return." Olivia's cheeks warmed. "Mr. Reed—" "Jackson," he corrected. "After a mistaken kiss and 3 weeks of coffee, I think we can dispense with formalities." A hint of a smile softened his usually stern expression. "Jackson," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. "I appreciate your patronage, but if you're implying something more—" "I'm not implying anything. I'm being direct, as I always am." He leaned forward slightly. "I'd like to know more about you." The request caught her off guard. "There's not much to tell. Single mom waitress trying to make ends meet like everyone else." "I doubt you're like everyone else, Olivia." The way he said her name sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. For instance, not everyone would accidentally kiss a stranger and then act as if nothing happened. "I was hoping we could forget about that," she said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "I find I don't want to forget it," he replied simply. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Glancing at the screen, she saw Ethan's school number flashing. Alarm immediately replaced any feelings of intrigue. "I need to take this," she said, standing abruptly. Stepping away from the table, she answered the call with trembling fingers. The school nurse's voice was calm but firm. Ethan had collapsed during recess. His breathing was labored, and they'd called an ambulance. He was being taken to Seattle Children's Hospital. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ethan had always been healthy, aside from occasional mild asthma. The serious episode requiring hospitalization, it didn't make sense. She barely registered hanging up, her mind already racing through logistics, getting to the hospital, potential costs, time away from work, all the terrifying unknowns of her son's condition. "Olivia," Jackson's voice cut through her panic. He was standing next to her, concern etched across his features. "What's wrong?" "My son," she managed, already untying her apron. "He's being taken to the hospital. I need to—" "Go. I need to—" Her voice broke as the reality of the situation hit her full force. Without hesitation, Jackson took her elbow, guiding her toward the door. "My car is outside. I'll take you." "I can't ask you to—" "You didn't ask. I offered." His tone left no room for argument. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Olivia barely registered sliding into the buttery leather seat of Jackson's sleek Aston Martin, or the way he navigated through traffic with calm efficiency, making calls that somehow cleared their path to the hospital. All she could think about was Ethan, her bright, energetic boy who never complained even when life got difficult. At the hospital, she expected Jackson to drop her off and continue with his day. Instead, he parked the car and walked beside her into the emergency department. When a nurse at the reception desk started the usual check-in process, Jackson stepped forward. "Ethan Bennett was brought in by ambulance approximately 20 minutes ago. His mother is here." His authoritative tone prompted immediate action. Within seconds, They were being escorted to a treatment room where Ethan lay connected to various monitors. Seeing her son's small form in the hospital bed broke something inside Olivia. His face was pale, an oxygen mask covering his nose and mouth, but his eyes brightened when he saw her. "Mom," he whispered, his voice muffled by the mask. Olivia rushed to his side, carefully embracing him. "I'm here, buddy. Everything's going to be okay." For the next few hours, doctors came and went. Tests were ordered, specialists consulted. Olivia remained by Ethan's side, holding his hand through each examination, trying to keep her growing fear from showing on her face. Jackson stayed too, maintaining a respectful distance, but never leaving the room. He made calls, spoke with hospital administrators, and somehow managed to expedite every procedure. By evening, the diagnosis came. Ethan had a rare form of pulmonary hypertension. The doctor explained that it was a condition where the blood vessels in the lungs become narrowed, making it difficult for blood to flow through them. It was why Ethan had been tired lately, why he sometimes couldn't keep up with other kids during physical activities. "We need to start treatment immediately," the doctor explained. "There's a specialized medication regimen that has shown promising results, but what?" Olivia asked, sensing the hesitation. "The treatment is quite expensive, and it's not fully covered by standard insurance. We can discuss payment plans and assistance programs." "Cost won't be an issue," Jackson interrupted, stepping forward. "Ensure he gets the best care available. I'll handle the financial arrangements." The doctor nodded and left to prepare the treatment plan. Olivia turned to Jackson, confusion and gratitude warring within her. "Why would you do this? You barely know us." Jackson's expression softened. "Perhaps I'd like to change that." Later that night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep, Olivia and Jackson sat in the small waiting area down the hall from his room. The hospital had quieted, with only the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floor breaking the silence. "I can't accept your money," Olivia said finally. "It's too much." "You can and you will," Jackson replied simply. "For Ethan." "I always pay my debts," she insisted. "I need to find a way to repay you." Jackson studied her for a long moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Actually, there is something you could do for me." Olivia tensed. Despite his kindness today, she knew men like Jackson Reed didn't give without expecting something in return. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. "Before your son's school called, I was about to invite you to dinner. Not as a waitress, but as my guest." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I have a proposal. I'm hosting an important business gathering at my home next week. My regular chef is unavailable, and I've heard you used to work in a restaurant." Olivia blinked in surprise. "How did you know that?" A slight smile. "I make it my business to know things, Olivia, especially about people who interest me." She should have been unsettled by this admission, but somehow she wasn't. "I was more than just staff. My family owned Bella Cucina in Capitol Hill before it closed." "Italian cuisine," he noted. "Perfect. My proposal is simple. Cook for my gathering for 1 week. 5 dinners, starting Monday. In exchange, I'll cover all of Ethan's medical expenses. No loans, no repayment plans." Olivia stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to be your personal chef for a week, that's it?" "That's it," he confirmed. She should have refused immediately. The arrangement was inappropriate, unbalanced. Yet, as she glanced back toward Ethan's room, she knew she had no choice. Her son's health came first, always. "I'll need access to a proper kitchen, specific ingredients. You'll have everything you need. My house manager will ensure it." Olivia took a deep breath. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Reed." "Jackson," he corrected again, extending his hand. As their fingers touched, Olivia felt an unexpected jolt of electricity. This arrangement was purely practical, a way to repay a debt while maintaining her dignity. Nothing more. Yet something in Jackson's eyes suggested he might have different expectations. 3 days later, Ethan was released from the hospital with a treatment plan and medications that would cost more than Olivia made in a year. True to his word, Jackson had handled everything, from securing the best specialists to arranging follow-up care. The following Monday, Olivia stood at the entrance of Jackson Reed's penthouse in downtown Seattle, a sleek, modern building with panoramic views of the city and Puget Sound beyond. As the private elevator carried her to the top floor, she reminded herself that this was a business arrangement, cooking in exchange for Ethan's medical care. Simple, straightforward. The elevator doors opened directly into a stunning foyer with soaring ceilings and modern art adorning the walls. A woman in a tailored suit greeted her with professional courtesy. "Miss Bennett, welcome. I'm Claire, Mr. Reed's house manager. He's in a meeting but asked me to show you to the kitchen and help you get settled." The kitchen was a chef's dream. State-of-the-art appliances, marble countertops, and a walk-in pantry stocked with ingredients of the highest quality. As Claire reviewed the schedule for the week, Olivia tried to focus on the tasks ahead, rather than the growing realization that she had entered a world completely different from her own. "Mr. Reed mentioned you might need accommodations for your son," Claire added. "There's a guest suite prepared if you'd prefer to have him stay here during the week." "That's very thoughtful, but my friend Megan is looking after him. It's better for his routine if he stays in familiar surroundings." Claire nodded. "Of course, if you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." Left alone in the kitchen, Olivia began examining ingredients and planning the evening's menu. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear Jackson enter. "You look right at home," he observed, causing her to startle slightly. Turning to face him, Olivia was struck again by his commanding presence. In the context of his home, dressed casually in a light sweater and dark jeans, he seemed both more approachable and somehow more intimidating. "Your kitchen is impressive," she said, maintaining a professional tone. "I'll prepare a sample menu for your approval before I start cooking." "I trust your judgment, Olivia." He moved closer, examining the ingredients she had laid out. "Tell me about your restaurant. Why did it close?" The question touched a painful memory. Economic downturn, rising costs, a few bad business decisions. The usual story. She busied herself with chopping vegetables. "One day we were thriving. The next we were facing foreclosure. My parents had put everything into that place. And now? Now my father works at a corporate restaurant chain, my mother manages a small bakery, and I serve coffee while trying to give Ethan the stability he deserves." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "We survived. That's what matters." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. Resilience is an undervalued quality in today's world. Their conversation was interrupted by Claire announcing the arrival of Jackson's business associates. With a final glance at Olivia, he left to greet his guests, leaving her to focus on the dinner preparations. As she worked, Olivia could hear the murmur of voices from the dining room, discussions of mergers, acquisitions, market strategies. The familiar rhythm of cooking calmed her nerves, reminding her of happier times at Bella Cucina. For a few hours, she could almost forget the strange circumstances that had brought her here. When she served the meal, a sophisticated take on traditional Italian cuisine, the appreciative murmurs from Jackson's guests validated her skills. She caught his eye across the room, and the quiet approval in his gaze stirred something unexpected within her. Pride, yes, but something else too. A dangerous flutter of attraction she couldn't afford to acknowledge. Later, after the guests had departed and she was cleaning the kitchen, Jackson returned with 2 glasses of wine. "Your cooking impressed everyone tonight," he said, offering her a glass, "especially me." "Thank you," she replied, accepting the wine despite her better judgment. It felt good to be back in a proper kitchen. "You have a gift, Olivia, one that shouldn't be wasted serving coffee." She took a small sip, appreciating the rich complexity of what was undoubtedly an expensive vintage. "We don't always get to choose our paths, don't we?" Jackson moved closer, his presence making the spacious kitchen feel suddenly intimate. "I believe we have more control than we realize. It's about recognizing opportunities when they present themselves." The way he looked at her made it clear he wasn't just talking about career prospects. Olivia set down her glass, creating some distance between them. "I should go, Ethan will be waiting up for me." Jackson nodded, respecting the boundary she'd established. "Of course, my driver will take you home." As she gathered her things, he added, "Same time tomorrow." "I'll be here," she confirmed. "After all, we have an agreement." What she didn't say What she couldn't admit, even to herself, was that she was looking forward to returning. Not for the kitchen, not for the opportunity to cook again, but for the chance to unravel more layers of the enigmatic Jackson Reed. A man who, despite his wealth and power, seemed as lonely as she sometimes felt herself. By the fourth day of their arrangement, a subtle shift had occurred between Olivia and Jackson. The initial awkwardness had given way to a comfortable rhythm. Each evening, after serving dinner to Jackson and his business associates, they would share a quiet moment in the kitchen, sometimes discussing the meal, other times venturing into more personal territory. These conversations had become Olivia's favorite part of the day. "Did you always want to be a chef?" Jackson asked as they sat at the kitchen island, sharing the chocolate soufflé she had prepared for dessert. Olivia smiled, memories of her childhood flooding back. "I grew up in my family's restaurant. By the time I was 10, I could make pasta from scratch. The kitchen was my playground." She paused, taking a small bite of the soufflé. "What about you? Did you always dream of becoming a tech mogul?" A shadow crossed Jackson's face. "I wanted to be an architect, actually. I used to sketch buildings when I was a kid." "What changed?" "My father died when I was 19. The company was struggling, and I had to step in." His voice held no self-pity, just matter-of-fact acceptance. Dreams became irrelevant. Survival was all that mattered. Olivia recognized the sentiment all too well. "Sometimes I think we're more alike than different," she said softly. Jackson's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the barriers between their worlds seemed to dissolve. "Perhaps we are." The following afternoon, Olivia arrived earlier than usual to prepare a more elaborate dinner for Jackson's most important business meeting of the week. According to Claire, several major investors would be attending, and the stakes were high. With Claire out running errands and Jackson still at his office, Olivia had the penthouse to herself. As she moved around the kitchen, preparing ingredients and planning the timing of each course, she felt a sense of belonging that had been missing since her family's restaurant closed. Needing a specific serving platter that Claire had mentioned, Olivia ventured into Jackson's study to look for it. The room reflected its owner, elegant, meticulously organized, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Seattle. A large desk dominated one wall, covered with neatly arranged documents. She located the platter in a cabinet, but paused as she was about to leave. On Jackson's desk sat a folder labeled Bennett Acquisition. Curiosity overrode her sense of propriety. With trembling fingers, she opened the folder. Inside were documents related to the closure of Bella Cucina, loan agreements, foreclosure notices, and finally, a memorandum detailing Reed Enterprises' acquisition of the building. The memo was addressed to Jackson personally. "As requested, we've completed the purchase of the property at 1423 Broadway. The existing business, Bella Cucina Restaurant, has been notified of non-renewal. Construction on the new development can begin next quarter." The date on the memo was 3 years ago, exactly when her family's world had fallen apart. Olivia stared at the document, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. It couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet there it was in black and white. Jackson Reed, the man who had been so kind to her and Ethan, who had paid for her son's medical treatment, who had made her feel valued again, was directly responsible for destroying her family's legacy. "Finding everything you need," Jackson's voice came from the doorway, causing Olivia to flinch. She hadn't heard him return. When she turned to face him, the document still in her hand, he immediately understood. The warmth in his eyes cooled, replaced by guarded caution. "You knew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All this time you knew who I was." Jackson stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Yes. My family lost everything because of you." The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds she thought had healed. "The restaurant was more than a business. It was our home, our heritage, everything my parents had worked for." "It was a business decision, Olivia. Nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "My father had a heart attack from the stress. My mother cried herself to sleep for months. We had to sell our house to pay off the debts. Ethan had to change schools because we couldn't." afford to live in the same neighborhood anymore, but sure, nothing personal. Jackson's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps, or guilt. The property was underperforming. The acquisition made financial sense for my company. And that's all that matters, isn't it? The bottom line. She placed the document back on his desk with deliberate care. Was this why you've been pursuing me? Some twisted form of atonement? Or did you just enjoy watching me cook in your kitchen, not knowing you were the one who took mine away? That's not fair, he said quietly. When I saw you at that elevator, I had no idea who you were. But you figured it out, didn't you? And still you said nothing. Would it have made a difference? Would you have accepted my help with Ethan if you had known? The mention of her son cut through her anger. Ethan's health had improved significantly thanks to the treatment Jackson had provided. No matter how betrayed she felt, she couldn't regret the decision that had helped her child. I need to leave, she said finally, gathering her composure. I can't do this anymore. Olivia, wait. Jackson moved toward her, but she stepped back. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. You made a business decision. I understand how the world works. She met his gaze, her eyes burning with unshed tears. But I can't be here, not knowing what I know now. Without waiting for his response, she walked out of the study, through the grand living room, and to the elevator that would take her away from the fantasy world she had briefly inhabited. As the doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of Jackson standing in the foyer, his expression a complex mixture of regret and resignation. The night air was cool against her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She began walking with no clear destination in mind, just needing to put distance between herself and the penthouse. Her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket, Jackson calling, no doubt, but she ignored it. Eventually, she found herself at a small park near her apartment. Sitting on a bench overlooking the city lights, she finally allowed herself to cry, for the restaurant, for her family's struggles, for the connection with Jackson that had felt so promising but was built on a foundation of unspoken truths. When her tears subsided, she checked her phone. 5 missed calls from Jackson and 1 text. Please let me make this right. She didn't respond. What could he possibly say that would change the facts? Their worlds had collided by chance, and for a brief moment she had allowed herself to believe that the divide between them wasn't insurmountable. Now she knew better. The following days passed in a haze of work and caring for Ethan. She returned to her shifts at the cafe, grateful that Jackson no longer appeared for his morning coffee. Megan noticed the change in her demeanor, but didn't press for details after Olivia made it clear she didn't want to discuss what had happened. A week after their confrontation, Olivia received an unexpected visitor at the cafe. Claire, Jackson's house manager, approached her table during her break. "Ms. Bennett," she said, her professional demeanor firmly in place. "Mr. Reed asked me to deliver this to you." She placed a legal-looking envelope on the table. "If it's money, I don't want it," Olivia said, not touching the envelope. "Ethan's medical bills are the only exception, and only because his health comes first." "It's not money," Claire assured her. "It's documentation. I think you should look at it when you're ready." With a polite nod, she left the cafe, leaving Olivia staring at the envelope. Curiosity eventually won out. Inside was a deed transfer for a commercial property at 1423 Broadway, the location of the former Bella Cucina restaurant. The paperwork showed that ownership had been transferred to Olivia Bennett, with all property taxes paid for the next 5 years. There was no note, no explanation, just the legal documents with Jackson's signature on the transfer line. He had given her back the restaurant, no strings attached. Olivia's mind reeled. The gesture was extraordinary. The property alone was worth millions in Seattle's hot real estate market. Yet it also felt like a confirmation of his guilt, an admission that he recognized the magnitude of what he had taken from her family. She placed the documents back in the envelope, unsure how to feel. The restaurant had been her family's dream, not hers. She had loved working there, but her passion had always been the food, not the business itself. What would she even do with the property now? That evening, when she returned home, she found her parents waiting in her apartment, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "Olivia," Is it true?" her father asked, his voice quavering slightly. "Reed Enterprises contacted us. They said Bella Cucina's property has been returned to our family." She nodded, still processing it herself. "Jackson Reed transferred the deed to me today. No conditions, no strings attached." Her mother clasped her hands together. "This is a miracle. We can reopen, start fresh." Olivia sat between her parents, feeling the weight of their expectations. "It's not that simple. The building has been empty for years. The equipment is gone. The renovations would cost a fortune." "But it's possible," her father insisted, a spark in his eyes that she hadn't seen since before the closure. "We could do it as a family the way we started. You've always been the most talented chef among us, Olivia." "I don't know," she admitted. "So much has changed. I have Ethan to think about." Her mother squeezed her hand. "Just promise you'll consider it. This is a second chance, sweetheart. Those don't come along every day." Later that night, after her parents had left and Ethan was asleep, Olivia stood by her apartment window, gazing at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in one of those gleaming towers, Jackson Reed was likely working late, making decisions that affected countless lives with the same calculated precision he applied to everything. Why had he given her the restaurant? Was it guilt, atonement, or something deeper? The question haunted her, as did the memory of those quiet evenings in his kitchen when the barriers between them had momentarily dissolved. 2 days later, Olivia's world tilted again. She was at work when she received a frantic call from Ethan's school. He had collapsed again, his breathing labored despite the new medication. By the time she arrived at the hospital, her son was already in the emergency room, surrounded by medical staff. "His condition has deteriorated," the doctor explained. "The initial treatment was helping, but we're seeing complications that require more aggressive intervention. He needs to be admitted immediately." Fear gripped Olivia's heart as she watched her son struggle for breath. "Do whatever is necessary," she told the doctor, pushing aside thoughts of how she would manage the financial implications. Hours stretched into a torturous vigil as tests were run and specialists consulted. Sitting alone in the waiting room, Olivia felt more isolated than ever before. Without thinking, she pulled out her phone and called the one person who had proven he could make things happen. Jackson answered on the first ring. "Olivia." His voice was cautious but tinged with hope. "It's Ethan," she said, her voice breaking. "He's back in the hospital. It's worse this time. I'll be there in 15 minutes. No questions, no hesitation, just a promise." True to his word, Jackson arrived at the hospital exactly 15 minutes later. He had clearly come directly from a meeting. His suit was impeccable, his manner composed, but the concern in his eyes was genuine as he sat beside her. "What have the doctors said?" he asked quietly. Olivia explained the situation, her voice steadier now that she wasn't alone. "They're talking about a more specialized treatment protocol, possibly even surgery." Jackson nodded, absorbing the information. "I know specialists at Boston Children's Hospital who focus specifically on pediatric pulmonary conditions. I can have them consulted on Ethan's case." "Why?" Olivia asked, the question encompassing everything: his continued support, the restaurant, his presence now when she needed someone most. Jackson was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the hospital corridor where medical staff hurried past. "Because I care," he finally said. "About you. About Ethan. More than I should, perhaps." A doctor appeared before Olivia could respond, informing them that Ethan had been stabilized and moved to a private room. Jackson stayed beside her as they walked to see him, his hand occasionally brushing against hers in a gesture of silent support. Ethan's room was quiet except for the steady beeping of monitors. His small form seemed even more fragile against the white hospital sheets, but his smile when he saw his mother lightened the heaviness in Olivia's heart. "Hey, buddy," she said, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," he admitted. Then, noticing Jackson, he added with surprising enthusiasm, "You brought your friend." Jackson approached the bed, his typically commanding presence softened. "Hello, Ethan," Your mom tells me you're not feeling well today. The E? Doctors say my lungs are being weird again. Ethan's matter-of-fact acceptance of his condition broke Olivia's heart. But they're giving me special medicine. I know some doctors who are very good at helping with lung problems, Jackson told him. Would it be okay if I asked them to help? Your doctors here? Ethan considered this with the seriousness only a child could muster. Are they nice doctors? The nicest, Jackson assured him. And very smart, too. This seemed to satisfy Ethan. Okay, then. As Ethan drifted off to sleep, Olivia and Jackson stepped into the hallway. The emotional barriers she had erected after discovering his role in her family's restaurant suddenly seemed less important in the face of her son's illness. Thank you, she said simply, for coming, for caring. Jackson's expression was more open than she had ever seen it. I know you have every reason to hate me. What happened with your family's restaurant, I can't change the past, Olivia, but I want to help create a better future for both you and Ethan. I don't hate you, she admitted. I was hurt, angry, confused, but I don't hate you. A nurse approached, informing them that Ethan would be sleeping for several hours and suggesting they take a break. Jackson immediately offered to drive Olivia home so she could rest and pack some things for an extended hospital stay. The drive to her apartment was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Olivia surprised herself by inviting him up. Her modest two-bedroom apartment was a far cry from his luxurious penthouse, but Jackson entered with respectful appreciation rather than judgment. "Can I make you some tea?" she offered, needing something normal to do amidst the chaos of the day. That would be nice. As she moved around her small kitchen, Olivia felt Jackson's eyes following her. When she handed him the mug, their fingers brushed, lingering longer than necessary. "About the restaurant," she began, settling across from him at her small dining table. "I don't know what to say. It's an incredibly generous gesture, but—" "It's not generosity," Jackson interrupted. "It's restitution. That property should never have been taken from your family." "But you're the one who took it," she said, needing to address the elephant in the room. Jackson's expression grew contemplative. 3 years ago I was different, colder, more focused on expansion than the human cost of my decisions. He met her gaze directly. "Meeting you has changed something in me, Olivia, made me question choices I once made without hesitation." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way their previous interactions hadn't been. Despite everything, Olivia felt drawn to this newly revealed vulnerability. "I don't know what happens next," she confessed. "With Ethan, with the restaurant, with—" She trailed off, unwilling to define whatever was developing between them. "Neither do I," Jackson admitted. "But I'd like to find out. Together." Before she could respond, her phone rang with an update from the hospital. The specialists Jackson had contacted were already reviewing Ethan's case and had recommended a promising new treatment protocol. They could begin as early as tomorrow if she consented. As she hung up, overwhelmed by the speed with which things were moving, Jackson rose to leave. "You should get some rest. I'll have my driver pick you up in the morning to take you back to the hospital." At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, Olivia, the week you spent cooking in my kitchen was the first time my penthouse felt like a home." With those words, he left, leaving Olivia to wonder if perhaps second chances were possible after all, not just for the restaurant, but for her heart as well. The following days passed in a blur of hospital visits, medical consultations, and cautious optimism as Ethan responded well to the new treatment. Jackson was a constant presence, juggling his business responsibilities with daily visits to the hospital. He never intruded on family moments, but was always there when needed, using his connections and resources to ensure Ethan received the best possible care. One evening, as Olivia was gathering her things to spend the night at the hospital, she found Jackson waiting by the nurse's station, deep in conversation with one of the specialists he had brought in. "The preliminary results are encouraging," the doctor was saying. "If he continues responding this well, we could see significant improvement within weeks rather than months." The relief that washed over Olivia was so profound that her knees nearly buckled. Jackson noticed her approach and excused himself from the doctor, moving to her side. "Good news?" she asked, hope making her voice tremble slightly. "The best," he confirmed, unable to suppress a genuine smile. "The treatment is working better than expected." Without thinking, Olivia threw her arms around him, overcome with gratitude and relief. Jackson stiffened momentarily, clearly surprised by the display of affection, then relaxed, his arms encircling her waist. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for what you've done for Ethan." Jackson pulled back slightly, his hands still resting lightly on her waist. "You don't owe me anything, Olivia. Seeing him get better, seeing you smile again, that's enough." The sincerity in his voice made her heart race. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and found herself hoping he would. Instead, he stepped back, always mindful of the boundaries between them. "There's something else we should discuss," he said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "I've been looking at the old Bella Cucina property. The building is structurally sound, but the interior will need extensive renovation to function as a restaurant again." Olivia nodded, trying to focus on the practical matter at hand rather than the lingering warmth where his hands had been. "I've been thinking about that too. My parents want to reopen, but the costs would be prohibitive. What if I were to offer financial backing as a silent investor?" At her hesitation, he quickly added, "No control over the business, no decision-making power, just capital to help your family rebuild what was lost." "Why would you do that?" Jackson's expression grew serious. "Because I was responsible for taking it away, and because—" He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "Because I believe in second chances, Olivia. For the restaurant. For us." The implication hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement that whatever was developing between them had the potential to be something significant. Before she could respond, a nurse approached to inform them that Ethan was asking for both of them. The conversation would have to wait. As they walked toward Ethan's room together, Olivia felt a strange sense of rightness despite the uncertainty that still surrounded them. The path forward wasn't clear, but for the first time in years she allowed herself to hope that happiness might be possible, not just for Ethan, but for herself as well. 2 months had passed since Ethan's hospitalization. Spring had given way to summer in Seattle, bringing long sun-drenched days and mild evenings, perfect for outdoor dining. Olivia stood in the newly renovated space that had once been Bella Cucina, watching as workers installed the final touches: pendant, lights above the bar, framed family photographs on the exposed brick walls, and herbs in the window boxes. The restaurant was scheduled to reopen in 3 weeks, reborn as Nuovo Inizio, New Beginning. The name had been Ethan's suggestion, and it felt appropriate for more reasons than one. "What do you think?" her father asked, coming to stand beside her. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Just like old times, only better." Olivia smiled, taking in the space that blended cherished elements of the original restaurant with contemporary touches. "It's perfect, Dad." "And we couldn't have done it without your young man," her mother added, joining them. She had taken to referring to Jackson as Olivia's young man, despite Olivia's insistence that their relationship defied such simple labels. True to his word, Jackson had provided the financial backing for the restaurant's renovation without demanding any control over the business. His only request had been that they consult with a top restaurant designer to ensure the space would be both functional and appealing to modern diners. "He's not my young man," Olivia corrected automatically, though her protest lacked conviction. The truth was more complicated. Since Ethan's release from the hospital, her relationship with Jackson had evolved into something neither of them had anticipated. They saw each other several times a week, casual dinners at her apartment where she cooked simple meals that delighted him more than any 5-star restaurant, weekend outings with Ethan to museums and parks, quiet evenings at his penthouse talking for hours about everything and nothing, yet neither had put a label on what they were to each other. The barriers remained, their different worlds, the history of the restaurant, the whispers that followed whenever they were seen together in public. Jackson Reed, dating a waitress and single mother, had become fodder for local gossip, though he seemed entirely unconcerned by the attention. "Olivia?" Her father's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "The wine distributor is here. Can you handle it? You know more about the pairings for your new menu than I do." She nodded, grateful for the distraction. As she walked toward the delivery entrance, her phone buzzed with a text from Jackson. "Dinner tonight, I have news." Smiling, she typed a quick response. "My place, 7 p.m, bring dessert." The remainder of the day passed in a flurry of activity, finalizing wine orders, training new staff members, and refining the opening menu. By the time Olivia returned to her apartment to prepare for dinner, she was exhausted, but exhilarated. After years of setbacks, her life was finally taking shape in ways she had never dared to hope for. Ethan was at a sleepover with his best friend, giving Olivia and Jackson a rare evening alone. She had just put the finishing touches on a simple but elegant meal when the doorbell rang. Jackson stood at her threshold, a box from her favorite bakery in one hand and a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. He had abandoned his usual business attire for dark jeans and a casual button-down shirt, an outfit that made him look younger, more approachable, but no less magnetic. "These are for you," he said, offering the flowers with an almost boyish smile. "I remember you mentioning they reminded you of summers in the San Juan Islands with your grandparents." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. It was these small moments of attentiveness that had gradually dismantled her defenses over the past months. "They're beautiful," she said, inviting him inside. "Dinner's almost ready." As they moved around her kitchen together, setting the table and uncorking wine, the easy domesticity of it all struck Olivia. How strange that this man, once a symbol of corporate coldness in her mind, now fit so naturally into her humble home. "So," she said once they were seated, "you mentioned you had news?" Jackson took a sip of wine, his expression carefully neutral. "I've been offered a position on the board of a major tech conglomerate based in San Francisco. It would mean relocating, at least part-time." Olivia's heart sank. "Oh, congratulations are in order." Then, "I haven't accepted yet," he said, watching her reaction closely. "There are considerations." "Such as?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "You, Ethan, the life I've found here." His directness, as always, caught her off guard. "The position is prestigious, the compensation exceptional. 6 months ago I would have accepted without hesitation. And now? Now I find myself unwilling to leave behind what matters most." He reached across the table, his fingers entwining with hers. "I've spent most of my adult life chasing success as defined by others, wealth, power, influence. It took meeting you to realize how empty that pursuit had become." Olivia's pulse quickened at his words. "What are you saying, Jackson?" "I'm saying I'd like to build a life here, with you and Ethan if you'll have me." His grip on her hand tightened slightly. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be premature. But I am proposing a commitment, a promise to see where this journey takes us." The sincerity in his eyes made her throat tighten with emotion. Before she could respond, her phone rang, Ethan's ringtone. Apologizing, she answered to find her son on the verge of tears. He wasn't feeling well and wanted to come home. "Of course, buddy. I'll come get you right away." She hung up, already reaching for her keys. "I'm sorry, but no apologies needed," Jackson said, standing. "I'll drive." 20 minutes later, they collected a pale and feverish Ethan from his friend's house. The boy perked up slightly at the sight of Jackson, managing a weak smile despite his discomfort. "Hey, champ," Jackson said, his voice gentle as he helped Ethan into the car. "Not feeling so great, huh?" Ethan shook his head miserably. "My chest hurts again." Alarm flashed across Olivia's face, but Jackson's steady presence calmed her rising panic. "Let's get you home and comfortable, then we'll see if we need to call the doctor." By the time they reached the apartment, Ethan's breathing had become labored, One look at his struggling form, and Jackson made an executive decision. "We're going to the emergency room," he said with quiet authority. "Better to be cautious." The next few hours were a blur of triage nurses, medical tests, and anxious waiting. Throughout it all, Jackson remained by their side, his calm pragmatism a counterbalance to Olivia's frantic worry. When the doctor finally emerged with news that Ethan was experiencing a minor inflammation but would recover quickly with treatment, the relief was overwhelming. As Ethan slept peacefully in the hospital bed, medication flowing through the IV in his arm, Olivia found herself in the familiar hospital waiting room with Jackson. The events of the evening had overshadowed their earlier conversation, but now in the quiet aftermath of crisis, his words returned to her. "I meant what I said earlier," he said softly as if reading her thoughts. "Tonight only confirms it. I want to be part of your lives, the good moments and the difficult ones." Olivia studied him in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room. This environment stripped away pretenses, revealing the essence of people in crisis. What she saw in Jackson was unwavering strength, genuine concern, and something deeper that made her heart race. Love, not yet declared, but unmistakably present. "I want that too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm scared, Jackson. Our worlds are so different." "They were," he acknowledged. "But I think we've been building a new world together these past months, one that belongs to neither of us alone, but to both of us together." Before she could respond, a nurse approached to inform them that Ethan was awake and asking for them. The conversation would have to wait, but the understanding that passed between them was profound. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The following morning, with Ethan released from the hospital and resting comfortably at home, Olivia checked her email to find several urgent messages from her mother. Local news outlets were running a story about Jackson Reed's relationship with a waitress whose family restaurant he had previously acquired in a controversial business deal. The articles painted her as an opportunist who had used her son's illness to manipulate her way into Jackson's life. Anonymous sources close to Reed questioned her motives, suggesting she was after his fortune or using him to finance her family's new restaurant. Anger and hurt washed over her in equal measure. After everything they had been through, to be portrayed so callously by strangers who knew nothing about their journey, it was a painful reminder of the public scrutiny that came with Jackson's world. When he arrived at her apartment that afternoon to check on Ethan, she showed him the articles without comment. His expression darkened as he read, jaw tightening with barely controlled anger. "I'll have my PR team issue a statement immediately," he said, already reaching for his phone. "These allegations are baseless and potentially libelous." "Will that help?" Olivia asked, unconvinced. "Or will it just draw more attention to the story?" Jackson paused, considering her words. "You're right. A statement might feed the frenzy." He set down his phone. "What would you prefer?" The question surprised her. Men like Jackson Reed didn't typically ask for opinions on matters of public relations. They acted decisively, controlling the narrative through wealth and influence. "I'd prefer to ignore it," she said after a moment's reflection. "The people who matter know the truth. My family, our friends, Ethan's doctors, they all understand what's real between us." Jackson studied her with newfound admiration. "Your resilience never ceases to amaze me, Olivia Bennett." "I've had practice," she replied with a small smile. "Life has thrown worse challenges my way than a few tabloid stories." In the days that followed, the media speculation intensified rather than dissipated. Photographers appeared outside the restaurant, renovation site, hoping to catch glimpses of Olivia or her family. Several even staked out her apartment building, making it difficult to come and go without being photographed. Jackson was furious, but Olivia remained surprisingly calm. "This will pass," she assured him. "Something more interesting will capture their attention eventually." What Olivia hadn't anticipated was the toll the attention would take on Ethan. Though they had sheltered him from the actual content of the articles, he was perceptive enough to know something was wrong. When a classmate brought a tabloid to school and taunted him about his mother dating a rich guy for his money, Ethan had come home in tears. That evening, as Olivia comforted her son, explaining in age-appropriate terms that sometimes people said unkind things about others without knowing the true story, Jackson sat quietly by the window, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but Olivia could sense the internal conflict he was experiencing. After Ethan had fallen asleep, Jackson broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "Perhaps it would be better if we took a step back," he suggested, his voice hollow, "just until the media loses interest." The suggestion hurt more than Olivia had expected, though she understood the practical reasoning behind it. "Is that what you want?" "What I want," he said with surprising vehemence, "is to protect you and Ethan from the ugliness that sometimes surrounds my life. You deserve better than this." "Don't we get a say in what we deserve?" Olivia challenged, a spark of defiance igniting within her. "I've spent years making difficult choices for the sake of my son's well-being. I know how to weigh risks against rewards, Jackson, and what we have, what we're building together, is worth weathering a few storms." The conviction in her voice seemed to resonate with something deep within him. "You're certain? Even knowing it might get worse before it gets better?" "I've never been more certain of anything," she said simply. 2 weeks before the restaurant's grand opening, Seattle was hit with an unseasonable storm. Rain pounded against the windows of the newly renovated Nuovo Inizio as Olivia and her father made final adjustments to the menu. Despite the weather, there was a palpable sense of excitement in the air, a new chapter beginning for the Bennett family. When Jackson called to say he was picking her up for dinner, she was surprised, but pleased. They hadn't had a proper date night since Ethan's emergency room visit, both too busy with their respective commitments. She with the restaurant preparations, he with restructuring his company to allow for more personal time. "Dress warmly," was his only instruction, leaving Olivia curious about what he had planned on such a miserable evening. When his car pulled up outside the restaurant, she was surprised to see him emerge without an umbrella, the rain plastering his normally impeccable hair to his forehead. There was something different about him, a nervous energy she had never associated with the typically composed CEO. "What are you doing?" she called from the doorway. "You're getting soaked." Instead of rushing to join her under the awning, Jackson remained in the downpour, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I had a different plan for tonight," he said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the rain. "Dinner at Canlis, a walk along the waterfront, perhaps a ferry ride, all leading to a perfect moment for what I'm about to do. But waiting for perfect moments means missing real ones." Before Olivia could process his words, Jackson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart skipped several beats as he opened it, revealing a stunning yet understated diamond ring. "I know I said I wasn't proposing yet," he continued, rain streaming down his face, "but the past few weeks have shown me that life is unpredictable and precious. I don't want to waste another day without making my intentions clear." Olivia stepped out into the rain, drawn to him by a force stronger than her desire to stay dry. "Jackson." "Let me finish," he said, his voice gentle but determined. "Olivia Bennett, I began falling in love with you the moment you mistakenly kissed me in that lobby. Every day since has only deepened that love. You've taught me what truly matters in life. You've made me a better man. Will you marry me?" The rain soaked through her clothes, but Olivia barely noticed. All she could see was the man before her, powerful yet vulnerable, certain yet humble, offering her a future she had never dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jackson, I'll marry you." His face broke into a smile of such genuine joy that it transformed him completely. As he slipped the ring onto her finger with slightly trembling hands, Olivia was struck by the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a mistaken kiss to a deliberate choice to build a life together. When he pulled her close, their lips meeting in a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express, neither cared about the rain that drenched them or the passing cars that honked in celebration of their public display of affection. In that moment, there was only the two of them and the promise of a shared future. Later that evening, dry and warm in Jackson's penthouse, they called Ethan at his grandparents' house to share the news. The boy's excited chatter about having Jackson as his official dad made them both laugh through happy tears. As they discussed potential wedding dates and living arrangements, Olivia marveled at how naturally their lives had intertwined, despite all the obstacles they had faced. In the weeks that followed, the media narrative gradually shifted. The story of the ruthless CEO and the opportunistic waitress gave way to a more nuanced portrayal, as people close to the couple spoke out about their genuine connection. The grand opening of Nuovo Inizio became a celebration not just of the Bennett family's resilience, but of new beginnings in all their forms. On opening night, with the restaurant filled to capacity and Ethan proudly showing guests to their tables in his miniature maitre d' uniform, Olivia found a quiet moment with Jackson. In the kitchen. "Happy?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind as she put the finishing touches on a plate of her signature osso buco. "Beyond happy," she confirmed, leaning back against his chest. "Though I still can't believe how we got here." Jackson chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her back. "You mean you can't believe it all started with you kissing a complete stranger?" "Best mistake I ever made," she admitted with a laugh. "I prefer to think of it as destiny," he replied, turning her in his arms to face him. "Some things are meant to be, even if the path getting there isn't what we expected." As he leaned down to kiss her, the kitchen door swung open to reveal Ethan, his face alight with excitement. "Mom! Jackson! Everyone loves the food! And guess what? A food critic from the Seattle Times is here." Jackson released her with a smile. "Duty calls. Chef Bennett, go dazzle them." As Olivia followed her son back into the dining room, surrounded by the warm glow of success and family, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of loss to the heights of joy, from a chance encounter to a life-changing love, she had learned that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the most unexpected beginnings. And as she caught Jackson's eye across the crowded restaurant, his gaze filled with pride and love, she knew with absolute certainty that their story was just getting started. Later that night, after the last guests had departed and the kitchen was clean, Jackson and Olivia stood together on the small rooftop garden of the restaurant. The storm had passed, leaving behind a clear night sky scattered with stars. In the distance, the Seattle skyline glittered like a reflection of the heavens above. "To new beginnings," Jackson said, raising his glass of champagne. "Two mistaken kisses and second chances," Olivia added, clinking her glass against his. As they sealed their toast with a kiss, both knew that the journey ahead would have its challenges. Their worlds would always be different in some ways, and merging them would require patience and compromise, but they had weathered storms both literal and figurative together and emerged stronger for it. Whatever the future held, they would face it side by side, writing their own story, one that began with a mistaken kiss but would continue with deliberate choices day after day to choose love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. Fimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Olivia and Jackson's journey from a mistaken kiss to true love has touched your heart. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from unexpected moments, and that second chances can lead to our greatest happiness. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories just for you. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Olivia and Jackson's story resonated with you. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore life's complexities, from heartbreaking challenges to triumphant moments of joy. Don't miss our upcoming content. Your next favorite story might be waiting just around the corner. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment in Olivia and Jackson's journey? Did their story remind you of your own experiences with unexpected love or second chances? Thank you for joining us today. And remember, sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with mistakes.